right, we continue. Thank you, Barbara. On the Disc Institute of Pittsburgh Newsline, former Marine bodyguard. He, of course, the man behind the brand that is INPAX, Sam Rosenberg. It's the Thelma Lovett YMCA, Center Avenue in Pittsburgh, tomorrow at 11. It's a free event. They urge you, if you are attending, and already close to 200 will be there, they are asking you to show up at least 20 minutes before the event, if you possibly can. It's all about ASSERT, active shooter survival and response tactics. What to do if you come face-to-face with an active shooter. And from the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, San Bernardino to parts of Europe, it just doesn't seem to leave the headlines, and that's terrorist and violence in these active shooters. So let's welcome Sam Rosenberg back to KDKA. Good morning, Sam.
Morning.
Great to have you here today. Tell me a little bit about what made you decide to put on this free event tomorrow.
Well, you know, I mean, as you just said, every time you turn on the news, San Bernardino, Paris, Orlando, the Orlando incident was the key one for me, where, you know, I once again had a sleepless night thinking about those folks in that nightclub. And, I got up the next day, I went into the office, I talked to my staff, and we basically said, let's go ahead and do a program for free for the community. It's just a community service kind of thing. We do this type of training, as you know, Rob, all over the country with workplaces. We do it with schools. We've taught, literally tens of thousands of people this methodology. And it's something that everyone can do, and it really makes an impact from the standpoint of getting past what we like to think of as the myth of helplessness. And we just decided we wanted to offer it to the Pittsburgh community. It's been very well received so far. We're working with the mayor's office, Mayor Peduto, and we're working with the Delta Foundation, as well as the YMCA and a number of other local organizations.
Now, if you go to my Facebook page, or of course INPAX, you can link in to them. You'll see what he and his wonderful associate Jessica were doing to really demonstrate what they can do, either with a short gun, long gun, how you can actually defend yourself against an active shooter. And I know it, to talk about it on the radio, it almost seems impossible to imagine, but you can really make a difference. And with just a few easy steps and lessons in which people will see tomorrow, they will have more than a fighting chance if they face an active shooter. Correct, Sam?
Absolutely. At the end of the day, here's the deal. Everybody understands, the basic mantra nowadays of run, hide, fight. In the event of an incident, you want to try and get off the X as quickly as possible and get out of the area. If you can't do that, you want to barricade yourself and hide and try and delay contact sufficiently for law enforcement to arrive. But at the end of the day, if you can't run and you can't hide, you come face-to-face with that armed intruder, what do you do? It's not so much a lack of courage. There's a lot of people who have a lot of courage. The problem is, if you haven't trained, if you haven't really developed any kind of specific skill set or specific plan to follow, the only thing that's going to happen in your brain is total paralysis. Possibly total panic, but the reality is most of the time, 99% of the time, you're just going to freeze. So the idea here is, by virtue of the training, what we're hoping to achieve, and what we do achieve, is the simple fact that you can think under pressure. You avoid that panic and paralysis, and you can make decisions. So the active training gives you the ability to either run or hide better, and certainly tells you and teaches you, what do you do if you actually have no alternative but to fight back, and know that you have significant advantages above and beyond what anyone's ever told you. These bad guys are not invincible by any means. In fact, they're quite brittle. They're quite brittle in terms of their psychology. They're brittle in terms of their ability to handle resistance. So all you have to do is have the right know-how. The problem is that, willingness is a state of mind, but readiness is a statement of fact. And you have to be able to be ready.
One of the things that we discussed while doing the video blog at the club at Shadow Lakes on Thursday, the evening before your appearance on Pittsburgh Today Live, the following day, was the fact that, all you hear is what they did. But in many cases, when they end up committing suicide, it usually is when they have faced some sort of controversy. And in particular, usually someone approaches them, how they do crumble very quickly when either accosted or confronted. Nobody ever talks about that story, but I think if you could look deep into the backstory, you would find out that many of these people that are committing these heinous crimes are nothing more than bullies and cowards.
Absolutely. Cowards being the optimal word. I can tell you right now that the statistics don't lie. The FBI has been studying this dynamic for the last 12, 13 years very aggressively and compiling data, which is very hard to do to separate these events from everything else. But here's what we know. We know that in the overwhelming majority of the time, law enforcement is not involved. So they're there after the fact. They're not going to be decisive in actually stopping the incident. And what that tells us, Rob, is that we are the actual first responders. And I think people inherently know that. The second thing we understand is that bad guys typically stop by way of committing suicide or running out of targets. But most of the time they completed their act and they decide to commit suicide. But what you want to understand is that fully a third of the time, statistically right now, a third of the time, ordinary people are stopping these shooters. Okay? That's before law enforcement gets there. A third of the time, these ordinary people like you and me are actually tackling these people, grabbing them, shooting them, tackling them, whatever it takes to stop them, and incapacitating them and creating a cease to the situation, a stop to the situation. The thing is that if you actually look at the statistics, very often the reason why they commit suicide is at the first sign of resistance. So if you actually look at the stats a little bit, it makes you question and think, how many times are they chalking it into a suicide column when in reality it probably should be chalked into the resistance column, because the reason why they committed suicide was because people were coming at them. And that is a very encouraging statistic, and it's the most powerful thing that tells you that, hey, ordinary people have a fighting chance because they're getting the job done without any training. Imagine what they can do with the right training.
All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about what's exactly going to be happening tomorrow at the Center Avenue YMCA. That, of course, around the Consol Energy Center and just at the foot of the historic Hill District of Pittsburgh with INPAX and our guest, Sam Rosenberg. We'll be back with more of Rob Pratte Saturday in just a couple of minutes. All right, back at it, and Sam Rosenberg on the Disc Institute of Pittsburgh Newsline talking about what INPAX is going to be doing tomorrow at the Thelma Lovett Center Avenue YMCA at 11 o'clock. They urge you to get there about 20 minutes beforehand. It's called ASSERT, Active Shooter Survival and Response Tactics. What do you do if you come face-to-face with an active shooter? So what's on the agenda for tomorrow, Sam?
Well, we're going to be basically teaching two fundamental interrelated themes, Rob. The first is the myth of randomness. We hear it all the time. We talk about violence, that, we say that in another act of random violence. When we label it violent, when we label violence random, what we're doing is we're basically sort of abdicating our personal responsibility. We're saying it's random, therefore it's unpredictable, and if it's unpredictable, therefore we have no responsibility towards helping to prevent it. But the reality is, violence is a process, and it's a process as observable and predictable as boiling water if you know what to look for, but are also in a position to see it. And I'm not saying the people that are dancing in a nightclub are necessarily in a position to see an attack, coming in its early pre-incident indicator stages. But the idea here is that this is an opportunity to educate people as to why these events happen, how they happen, who could commit them, what kind of person could commit such an act. The second is the myth of helplessness. We're going to really aggressively deal with and address physically, hands-on, how do you manage it if you come face-to-face with an armed intruder who's intent on killing someone? What do you do? How do you disarm that firearm? How do you manage it?
When you talk about someone, doing this, a lot of people are saying, I can't. I'm going to freeze. I'm going to be too afraid. The first thing I'm going to think about is fleeing and running. Look, all of the above, those are emotions that anyone, even an ex-Marine and bodyguard such as yourself, feel. And you have said if you have a chance to flee, flee. But in many cases, you don't have a chance to flee, correct?
Exactly. I mean, fear is always going to be a factor. And the problem that happens is not so much a function of, the fear itself, but as a byproduct of the fear. When we have a situation that we don't have a lot of experience with, the only thing that can truly occur is either panic or paralysis. The issue that we have is not one of physicality, of am I a 100-pound woman against a 300-pound guy, and how will I be, quote-unquote, strong enough? The reality is that what we're talking about here is being able to control our mind. and being able to overcome the panic and paralysis so that we can take decisive action. The mechanics that I'm going to show tomorrow are doable for anyone of any walk of life. We teach this to teachers. I can tell you right now, teachers as a group did not get into the educational field because they had a burning desire to be security professionals and are all robust athletes. The reality is this can be done by anyone, and it has been proven to be done so. So the idea here is that what we want to be able to do is, through the vehicle of the physical training, train our minds in such a way that first and foremost we can make the right decisions. Our mantra is you train the body and the mind follows.
When you think about what's happening, it doesn't seem as though it's going to slow down anytime soon. One of the things that we talked about the other night was the fact that there's not any place in the around the globe that's safe right now. What do you think it's going to take for this to slow down and hopefully come to a stop? Is it only going to be by the self-preservation of the people that are being attacked, the weak, meaning innocent bystanders and just people that are trying to go about their lives on a day-to-day basis? Are the world and people such as ourselves going to have to stand up and to make a difference and hopefully, find a way to stop this or at least slow it down?
I think at the end of the day, Rob, you've heard me say it a million times, but my personal philosophy is that it's good to have a lifeguard, but ultimately you should know how to swim. I think a foundation and a cornerstone principle of this is personal responsibility. It's understanding that it's fine to live in a good neighborhood. It's fine to try and take precautions. It's fine to count on the fact that our noble men and women in blue, the law enforcement community and the emergency responders are coming to help. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to what you have between your ears, your own ability to manage situations. As far as trying to stop this on a global basis, what I can tell you is this. I've been observing and really studying intimately this dynamic of mass homicide since its inception in the early 90s. It is a new manifestation of violence. This type of thing did not exist before the last 25, 30 years. It didn't even exist in our culture or anywhere else in the world historically. We've had the Hitlers and Genghis Khans. We never had children coming into schools to try and kill other children. At the end of the day, what I can tell you is that one of the primary issues is the media notoriety that we are achieving and we are allowing these folks. If you want to take the fuel from the fire, what we have to do is stop promoting, if you will, a degree of celebrity nature to these bad guys. The kind of 24/7 media coverage that we provide, where we delve into their background and go, who was the Dallas shooter? Who was the Orlando shooter? Who were these people? What were their motivations? What were their parents like? What were their kids like? What was their upbringing like? All this kind of stuff creates an anti-hero concept that all it does is promote the next copycat and say, look at the notoriety this person's achieved. And at the foundation of their psychology is they want to achieve the same thing. So the problem that we have is multifaceted. That's one of the critical issues. In my opinion, that is literally the oxygen that feeds the flame.
Listen, I can't thank you enough. Quickly, got about 30 seconds. Just invite everyone out tomorrow, okay?
If you can come out, come out. We prefer advanced registration. You can visit our website at livewithconfidence.com. Go to the calendar page. You'll see the ASSERT free class listed there. Register in advance so we know how many people are coming, so we can prepare staff and equipment as appropriate. But it's at the Thelma Lovett YMCA on Center Avenue, just north of the Consol Energy Center. We'd love to see everyone out there. This is an opportunity. We've never had this open to the public before. Come and, if you have questions, give us a call. We'll be in the office this afternoon, or I should say this morning. But otherwise, we'll be preparing for the event this afternoon and tomorrow, and we'll hope to see you guys there.
All right, Sam, always a pleasure. Best of luck, okay?
Thank you, Rob. Take care. Appreciate the assistance getting the word out here on this.
All right, folks, we'll be back.